Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Au nom du conseil d'administration de la Guilde du jeu vidéo du Québec, je vous souhaite la bienvenue. On behalf of the Board of Directors of la Guilde du jeu vidéo du Québec, I would like to officially welcome you to MEGAMIGS 2020. MEGAMIGS is an international event that brings together video game professionals from all corners of the world, including publishers, investors, and gaming enthusiasts, working in the industry both here and abroad. De plus, le grand public, pour qui nous produisons les jeux, est invité aussi à participer à plusieurs volets de notre programmation. All of this makes MEGAMIGS not only unique in Quebec and Canada, but an annual gathering that strongly contributes to the promotion of Quebec place as a global leader in the production of video games. Dans le contexte actuel, il nous est apparu essentiel de poursuivre la tenue de l'événement malgré la pandémie et cette fois-ci, évidemment, en mode virtuel. Il nous semblait très important de consolider notre position de chef de file en allant de l'avant avec une édition de calibre international malgré la situation. L'industrie du jeu vidéo a prouvé sa résilience et sa capacité de maintenir ses standards de qualité et d'ingéniosité durant les derniers mois et la qualité de l'édition 2020 du MEGAMIGS est là pour en témoigner. I would like to say thank you to the team for their initiative and investment in the development of such a rich and varied program. Panels on the leadership and management of creative teams, roundtables with renowned experts, various sponsored conferences. Profitez de l'événement en mode virtuel aussi pour créer des mariages d'affaires qui seront porteurs pour l'avenir. Aussi, le grand public pourra expérimenter plus de 75 jeux québécois ou de studios internationaux. Enfin, surveillez le prix d'excellence qui récompense les meilleures créations. Vous avez jusqu'au 20 novembre pour voter pour vos coups de cœur en visitant le site Internet du MEGAMIGS. Les gagnants seront dévoilés à 17h le 3 décembre via la page Facebook du MEGAMIGS. I would like to thank our partners and sponsors. Thank you for your confidence and your involvement, which makes all the difference. Tout d'abord, Red Barrels, notre commanditaire présentateur depuis déjà plusieurs années. Nos partenaires Prestige, la Ville de Montréal, Square Enix, Google Stadia et Ubisoft. Notre partenaire investissement, Investissement Québec. Notre partenaire médiatique, Bell Media et RDS Jeux vidéo. Partenaire de réseautage, Exola. Partenaire technologique, Amazon Games. Aussi, je voudrais souligner quelques autres partenaires sans qui l'événement ne pourrait avoir lieu, comme Pollution Games, GameIndustry.biz, Parsec, le pôle synthèse, Technologie Rob Inc., Tourisme Montréal. À tous et toutes, profitez de cette édition toute spéciale du MEGAMIGS 2020. Merci.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion entitled Allyship in EA Games and in Our Communities. Today, we have the fortune of speaking with various members of EA's ERG members. And together, we believe that we all have a role to play as allies to support greater inclusion and change on our teams and also within our communities and products and services. So for everyone in attendance, we just want to let you know that this is not achievable without you, our allies. But before we begin, I'd like to make a quick acknowledgement of the land on which this event is taking place, and I'll ask Julien to do that honor.
Thanks, Danny. So even though this event is happening virtually this year, we would like to start by acknowledging that the MEGAMIGS traditionally takes place on unceded indigenous lands. And we know this land has been inhabited for over 5,000 years, and it's been a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. The Kanien'kehá:ka nation, who is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today, named it Tjotja'ake, which means where streams part or meet. Today, Tjotja'ake, or Montreal, is home to a diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationship with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Julien. So like I mentioned earlier, each of our panelists here today are members of our different ERGs at EA. ERGs are employee resource groups, which are voluntary employee-led groups that foster a sense of belonging through modeling inclusive behaviors, increasing employee engagement, and also engaging different perspectives to create a greater employee and player experience. I myself am part of the Aspire ERG, which is the Asian and Pacific Islander. And actually, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Danny Liu. I am legal counsel here at EA. And as I mentioned, I'm part of the Aspire ERG here in Montreal, but I'm also a member of the Pride ERG, which represents the LGBTQ plus community. We also have representation here today from WHAT, which is the Women's Ultimate Team, SOMOS, which is the Latinx ERG, BEAT, the Black and African American ERG, and ABLE, the ERG for differently abled people. So what I'll do now is I'll pass the microphone over to my colleagues for them to tell you a bit about themselves and their background and where they're situated. So randomly, I will pick on Alma.
Hi, so my name's Alma. I'm an associate development manager, most recently on the Star Wars Squadron team at Motive. I am the local WHAT, so the Women's Ultimate Team chapter lead here in Montreal, and I'm also a member of the Aspire ERG. I am trying to think if there's anything else relevant to tell you. I'm originally from Toronto, and I've lived 10 years here in Montreal.
Julien.
Hey, I'm Julien. I'm a software engineer with Motive. I've been with Motive in Montreal for about 4 years and in the games industry for about 12 years. And I am a lead with the local chapter EA Pride, or LGBTQ plus employee resource group.
Joann.
Hi, I'm Joann Pollard, and I am a global brand manager in Orlando for the Madden team. I am a global chapter lead for Orlando for the Women's Ultimate Team and a development pillar lead for BEAT, the African American organization, ERG, and I'm also very, very actively involved in SOMOS.
Thanks, Joann. And of course, last but not least, Tülay.
Hi, I'm Tülay, tätig at McNally. I've been with EA for 10 years, games industry for almost 15 years now, and I worked for studios like BioWare and DICE previously, to moving into a brand new position at EA, which is called Director of Inclusive and Diverse Product Development. And as such, I'm working across all studios and teams supporting our developers with guidance around the topic of inclusion and diversity in our products. And I'm based in Stockholm.
Thanks, Tülay. So today's panel discussion is going to be split into two parts, as the title of this panel suggests. We're going to talk first about allyship within our communities, and then we'll subsequently talk about allyship within our games. Some of the themes that we'll discuss today are ally and allyship, microaggressions, unconscious bias, and to begin with, the most important part of it is define what ally and allyship is so that you have an understanding as to why we feel that it's important. So ally and allyship implies or requires that people like you on today's call use your privilege and position of power to help and support and lend a voice to underrepresented and marginalized communities in order to help us achieve greater inclusion, be it in the workplace, in the community, or in our products and services. So to begin with, why is this important? It's important because greater inclusion will lead to greater inclusion and diversity leads ultimately to better games and better products and better people in general. And I think one of the issues that arise, or one of the concerns that first arise with respect to people from marginalized or underrepresented communities is that sense of exclusion. And so what I'd like to begin with is start by asking the members of this panel if you've had examples in your life where you've had that sense of exclusion, be it at work or be it within the community.
Yeah, I can take that. When I was in graduate school, we had an organization called LEAD, and we were all a group of leaders within the campus community, and we did this thing called Second Conversations. And essentially it was an opportunity to revisit a conversation that you've had and address it in any way, good, bad, or indifferent. So I was in a situation where I felt like I was being talked over and I kept trying to say something, and eventually I kind of just gave up and decided that I wasn't going to contribute. But one of my classmates said, "Hey, you guys, I think Joann's trying to say something." And he created the space to give me a voice. And I really appreciated that, because again, I had felt like I wasn't really being heard. And after that situation, I approached him and I asked him, "Hey, Andrew, can we have a second conversation?" And, you know, I could see that he was a little cautious because he didn't know what I was going to say. He didn't know if I was going to tell him, "You did this awful thing and I didn't appreciate it," or whatever it was. So I told him, you know, "I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to let you know that I really, really appreciated you stepping in and allowing my voice to be heard. I did feel like nobody really cared what I had to say. And by doing what you did, you showed me that you do care and that my voice is important. So thank you, and I appreciate that." So that was one instance, not necessarily work related, but in a school setting where I was given a voice and I had that allyship.
Thanks, Joann.
Yeah, I think it's such a good example as well of things we can do, especially right now when we're all on Zoom and then you're trying to have meetings and then continue your work in this situation. Sometimes it can be tricky, you know, to speak during a Zoom call. So I think like just starting with that statement can help. As to me, I wanted to add a bit of more example as well. But first I wanted to say like how things have changed in the last 12 years, like since the start of my career. I feel like it's pretty spectacular. You know, when I started in games about 12 years ago, it was still in a big studio, but in France, so it was a different culture there. But also, like the games industry at the time was very more openly maybe a toxic bro culture. So I feel like at the time there was really not place at all for LGBTQ people. We were, you know, there was a lot of peer pressure, mostly by you know, the dominant straight males in the studio, and there was a lot of name calling with homophobic slurs, which created this very unsafe environment where nobody was really able to come out of the closet. So I had no idea if there was actually anyone else like me. So it could feel pretty lonely. And you know, it's I guess as an LGBTQ plus person, it's something that you go through your life and you you understand your identity, and then you have to come out of that closet. So having to finally get your dream job and then having to go back into that closet was like pretty bad. But you know, I wish at the time someone had said something. I think that would be my first tip. If you have a seat at the table, if you have that privilege, you know, it really costs you nothing to say, actually, I think you shouldn't say that, you know, like if you hear sexist, homophobic, or ableist language, if you hear like discrimination against age or homophobic slurs, really it's such a small thing to say. Hey, actually, I think it's not cool to say that, and it can really drive important positive change. And then another example that I have would be also pretty simple, because I had both experiences, which was just you know, you're gonna have conversation with your office teammates, and then sometimes you're gonna ask like personal question. And I remember right when I started in Montreal a few years ago, someone asked, "Hey, actually, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend?" And it was just like, you know, like not making any assumption and saying, "Oh, a boyfriend." And I think at the time, like, I don't think that person really expected me to say, "Oh, actually, I have a boyfriend," at all. So I had a bunch of like looks around me that were like, "Oh, really?" like maybe they were like just thinking, "Oh, I was just being polite," but he actually said yes. So, but it really made me feel safe. You know, it really made me feel included, and it was like, "Oh, actually, I have the opportunity to tell the truth." And on the other hand, I had the opposite experience when I went back to an old studio on sort of like a semi-official visit, let's say, and I was meeting with all like these like important people in a very like businessy setting, and then one of the people there, who by the way I love, like she's I think she's amazing, but she, like, I'm not trying to call her out, and I think she, you know, she had good intention, but she was like, "Oh, so did you find a beautiful wife in Quebec?" And I was like, "Oh, there is so much to unpack here." And you know, there was all these important people around me, and I was like, I don't know, I just became red, and I was like, I have no idea what to follow this up with. So it was like, oh, that's too bad. But anyway, so it's, yeah, I guess that would be my second tip. Like, don't make assumptions, and then, you know, just open the door when you ask those questions. It can like also really make a good inclusion difference.
Thanks, Joann. Thanks, Julien. It's very important, or it's great actually that you provided those examples, because I think it also reinforces the reason why we're having the discussion, and it's the fact that you as allies often have that power to lend the voice and using your privilege and who you are to those who are unrepresented. Much like Julien mentioned, you know, he wished he had someone who was there to have to back him up and to speak for him, or at least lend him that voice. And I think when Julien was talking about the bro culture, it really is a situation that is unconscious and most likely unintentional. And I think in one of the discussions that I had with Julien, he also mentioned that there were homophobic slurs that were being launched. And it really is a situation where there's an expression of prejudice towards a marginalized group, but it's never really overt. And you know, those are examples of microaggressions that can take place. And again, it's very important that allies like yourselves, like us, are there to support those who are unrepresented. So it segues or leads into the next part of the next question that I have, and it really is, what can you as an ally do? So I'd like to ask the panel if you have other examples where an ally came forward and helped lend you a voice and allowed you to speak.
Yeah, I can. I have some thoughts on this one. So, to Danny's point, like allyship requires action. So I think that regardless of whether we're part of an underrepresented group or not, I think there's space for us all to reflect on ourselves and ask, what is unique about my position and my role, and how can I use that to amplify underrepresented perspectives around me. So in my role, I deal a lot with driving meetings and fostering communication between different groups. So I think a lot about active listening. So if you're someone who is in a similar position to me, I thought it might be helpful to give kind of 3 tangible things that you can do to really be a better active listener. So the first step is really to acknowledge who has a seat at the table, who's in the room, or maybe who is underrepresented and who is not. And to be an active listener, I think part of that is about making space and acknowledging that in making space for other people, that's not about taking away space from me, but it's something that's going to make it better for everybody. So what I like to do when I drive a Zoom meeting, I try to encourage people to turn on their cameras as much as they can, because in that way I'm not just listening with my ears, I can actually see my team, and I have a chance to really notice if there's people who are trying to interject but can't, kind of like in the way that Joann mentioned earlier. And before I move on to the second topic in a meeting, I'll try to say things like, "Hey, like Joann, I noticed that seemed like you wanted to jump in. Like, do you have anything to add before moving on?" And in that way, I'm making space for people who maybe haven't been able to find the pause in conversation and giving a chance to really incorporate everybody's perspectives, not just those who might be like the most dominant in the conversation. Another really like easy win that we can do when we have a platform that enables it is to turn on closed captioning for those who might be hearing impaired, or to even take meeting notes and post them on a different platform like Slack or something afterwards. That's just like an easy thing that can be done. And then the final thing that I try to do, I have like a particular group of phrases to try to reframe ideas, to try to combat kind of making assumptions, like Julian said. I know that when we're having like passionate creative discussions especially, it's easy to get really swept up in the topic and to be excited about things and to kind of miss the core of what someone's saying. So an example that I heard my creative director use that I love to use myself now is to say things like, what I understand from what you're saying is ABC. Did I get that right? And that last part, the did I get that right, is actually super important because it gives them the opportunity to come back to me and say, oh, actually, no, like what I meant was more like an XYZ kind of thing. And it's just like a good practice because it avoids miscommunication. It helps things run more smoothly in the long run. And it really fights the assumptions that might be getting made. And it also does a good job of tackling unconscious bias too.
Can I actually quickly add to this? Because I just remembered something with, I think a lot of us probably, and especially, I guess, women maybe suffer more from that, I don't know, as imposter syndrome. And when I actually started at EA, at BioWare, I remember we were in a meeting with Ray Musica, and I was still new. I suffer from imposter syndrome. I'm at the beginning of my career at EA. And we were in a meeting with all the senior studio leaders talking about something Mass Effect 2 related. And then he stopped the room and said, Tülay, what do you think? And then I voiced my opinion. And for me, that was such a powerful moment because I felt like you are really boosting my confidence. And then after I said what I wanted, he didn't kind of, oh, I think what you're trying to say is here. So he just said, yes, we should do what you said. And then it was just like such a power, like a confidence boost for me that when a senior person like that just like stops the room and says, you had a smart idea, let's do that. That's just incredibly powerful. So thank you, Ray. But I would encourage every senior leader to do that with sponsoring people in the room who are maybe more quiet.
And I will maybe add one more thing that everybody can do as well is pronouns. I think it joins a bit my comments on trying to come out of the closet and then doing your coming out. You can actually make a difference for people by normalizing the use of pronouns. Even if you are, cisgendered and you never really ask yourself the question about your pronouns, just writing them in your bio, maybe on Slack, on Teams, on Twitter, on the tools that you use, can help like create that environment where people are going to feel more safe about coming out. And then when, of course, like when people tell you what their pronouns are, use them and see it as an opportunity to support your teammates.
Thanks, everyone. So I note that Alma mentioned unconscious bias, and I would like to say that we all have unconscious biases. We may or may not realize it, but we all do. And just so as to allow everyone to understand what an unconscious bias is, the words sort of speak for themselves. It's unconscious, and it's a bias, and it really are. They're really social stereotypes that we have about a certain group of people that we're not really fully aware of. But through our actions, through our behavior, and through our comments, sometimes we betray those stereotypes, and they come forward without us even knowing it or really even wanting it to be the case. So from there, I guess I'd like to ask the panel, do you have other examples of unconscious bias that you've encountered? And a follow-up question to that, what do you think is needed to do? What do you think we need to do and what our allies need to do in order to break down those unconscious biases?
Yeah, so I can take this one again, or give an example actually. I can give an example that I think a lot of women identifying and other underrepresented groups for that matter deal with a lot, and that is the perception that we are maybe more emotional in how we communicate. And even just saying that sounds super antiquated in 2020, but I see it all the time. And it speaks to the fact that women's soft skills are often evaluated and scrutinized in a different way than men's. Um, I know that that unconscious bias is something that I'm gonna have to deal with in my career, so I actually take great lengths to tailor my communication style to try to combat that. So with that in mind, it's incredibly demoralizing when I bring an idea or an issue forward to be met with responses that address a perception of my emotions rather than what I'm actually saying. So I've been in situations where I'll, be presenting something and someone will say, "Oh, don't be mad," or "You looked really upset in that meeting," or like, "Oh, don't worry about it." And it's frustrating because I am not here to have a conversation about my feelings. I'm here to have a conversation about my issues and ideas that I'm bringing forward in this setting. And now I feel like I have to kind of deal with this person's perception of my emotions on top of the issue at hand. So this has led me to think a lot more about authentic communication. What does authentic communication look like from people from different backgrounds? And equally important is what is our perception of certain communication styles over others. So, for example, like I have the privilege of having a formal communications background and having worked in sort of traditionally professional settings. So, I feel like the way that I package my ideas has served me well and has been accepted within those settings. However, the way that I package my ideas does not necessarily make the content of what I'm saying more valuable than someone who might communicate it more differently. So I think that there's a lot of space for us to be self critical and to really think about what kind of communication we deem professional or intelligent or acceptable, and maybe where that comes from and what that says about us rather than what it actually says about the person who's speaking. That's what I would say on that.
Thanks, Alma. Does anyone have any other examples about unconscious bias that you've encountered?
I think I have something based on while we're speaking of communication, maybe language. I think a lot of us can empathize with that. For me, in my personal life, English is my third language because I was born and raised with my bilingual Turkish German, and in my personal life, growing up in Germany, two Turkish parents. Outside of a work context, example is that when you do not speak a language fluently, people often perceive you as less intelligent because of how you are expressing yourself. My father, for example, he went to college. He spoke Turkish and French. He worked in the movie industry, so he had a rich life before he came to Germany, but because his language skills were not up to par, people would speak to him like you pick phone and you go there. So not even giving him an opportunity to properly learn the language, to be accepted in society. So I think that is something that makes me very emotional. So it's when we talk about allyship, we also have to think about like socioeconomic backgrounds, people who maybe come from a less privileged socioeconomic background, and kind of help and support them. And one of those things is by helping them learn the language so they can not encounter those very hurtful stereotypes. As a positive example of what we have done in Montreal, in BioWare Montreal, actually, was something called the language buddy, which is essentially your language buddy is like your language ally, where people had like a sticker at their desk so that when someone came to Montreal to the studio to start work, they knew who would be patient enough to, and now I'm kind of rambling myself, patient enough to help you get the confidence you need in French, and not kind of switch back to English or ignore you, for example. So I think that was very appreciated by a lot of people. So I think that's a really positive example how small things you can do just to encourage and support people and not judge them based on their abilities or language skills.
I actually have an unconscious bias situation that's the opposite of what Tülay was speaking about with how you speak and communicate and express yourself. And in my case, I think that I've gotten throughout my life a lot of people who are surprised that I speak the way that I do, because they have a perception that, being Afro-Latina, that maybe I do not have command of the English language, which is clearly not the case. So, questioning your biases with anyone in the way that they speak and communicate, I think, is super important.
Thanks, everyone. So we're sort of running. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wanted to say, like all these examples, really show you the problem with unconscious bias is that the burden is often on the person who is on that end of the scrutiny. So the person who is scrutinized has to fight against this, which is something that they have to fight on top. So I think when to get back into the context of allyship, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, unconscious bias is not something that concerns me. It's something that these other people have. It's like something that like racists or sexist people will have, and that's definitely not me. But the key to unconscious bias is that it's unconscious, as you said. So it's something that you do without realizing, and it's something that, as Alma was saying, requires action. It's something that you cannot fight passively. It's something that you need to actively fight yourself. And there's actually a lot of studies on the topic of unconscious bias. So there's a lot of reasons of why it shows up. Our brains are constantly trying to find patterns and then make meaning out of situations and then make those shortcuts so that it's easier to process the world. So you have to fight those mechanisms to try and really fight unconscious bias. And I think in the games industry or in the company world, there are really two key areas where you cannot afford not to do that work. And it's about talent acquisition and talent assessment if you're a people manager. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. And, unconscious bias in talent acquisition, it can actually, it can go both ways. So it can be, oh, I don't trust that person, or it can be, oh, I trust that person over that person out of like unrealistic criterias. I think it played a key role in my career, because at the very beginning of my career, the biggest goal was just to find the first job in the games industry, and then this will allow me to start my career. And so when I interviewed at the studio and then statistically, you know, I had more chance to find people that looked like me on the panel, that had some similar life experience to me, like the similar culture. And I think it played a key role in getting my first job. Like the person could really empathize with me and think like, oh, yeah, he looks like a younger version of myself. I trust him, you know, which is something that, you know, you will definitely see. But when we say that, when we tell people, oh, you know, you had privilege, people tend to take it personally and tend to say, well, you don't think I deserve to be here, or you don't think I'm worthy. And I think it's a bit wrong to see it like that. I think you should really see it in the way that a lot of other people deserve to be here. And like if this industry was just as diverse as the world, we would be so much richer. We would be like making very different games, I think, and we would be in a much better position. So when you're recruiting, you really have to do that work yourself and say, okay, when this person could do the job, this person could do the job, why am I thinking this person is better or this person is better? You need to find the criteria and then really think of that. And then just to add on talent assessment, I have some numbers which are from internal training material on unconscious bias. And it's saying like, did you know that women receive 3 times as much feedback about having a negative aggressive communication style? They receive 1.5 times as many references to team accomplishments as opposed to individual achievements. They receive 1/3 fewer reference to having vision or tech expertise, and half as much feedback linked to business outcome. And you know, when you look at those numbers, which are like really significant, it really doesn't pay a deep picture of the difference between men and women, right? It really paints a rather sad picture of the people who assess the talent of women in organizations. So I think it's something that people have to think about throughout their work. There is no hiring a diverse workforce is not enough. You need to show up for your diverse workforce through their career.
Thanks, Julien. I think what your comment about privilege is also very interesting. I recently saw this quote about white privilege, but I think it applies equally for any other privilege, you know, depending on what position of power you have. And the quote read something like this. It said that white privilege doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't had a hard life. What it does mean is that the color of your skin isn't one of the things that has made your life harder. And I think that's very important. We all have struggles, and because of who we are, sometimes things are easier. And for me, for example, one of the unconscious biases that I face is that of the model model minority stereotype, which is that Asians are hardworking, they're docile, they're passive, and they'll do what you want them to do. And sometimes those stereotypes are a bit hard to overcome and even achieve. But because of lack of time, what we'll do is we'll switch over to our second gear, which is to talk about allyship in our games. And you also alluded to it to a certain extent, Julien. We know that studies have demonstrated that diversity of cultures, background, thought contribute to better companies, better products, better services, and in general, better people. So I guess my question to the panel now as we shift focus is, how does diversity and inclusion at EA lead to better products and services?
Maybe I can take this one first, and then we can open a room for other opinions. But I think, first of all, I want to say that everything that EA does with regards to setting up ERGs, really being open and welcoming, empowering people to engage and be themselves, and really leaning into the fact that we want to create safe spaces where people can be themselves, be authentic, be as creative as they can be is super important to just like set up the stage for us to really create those diversity and inclusion in our games, to be welcoming to all of our players as well. So I think both the culture and workspace and the diversity and inclusion in our products help and support each other. So I think what we do here, even the allyship discussions and everything we have, is just like really setting up the right tone and culture for our teams to build those diverse products. And I think one of the things that we are trying to achieve is that we want to build products where people of all backgrounds and abilities feel welcome and can play. And that's not just the products, but also the services, because research, external research, but also research we have done here internally within EA really shows that relationship between toxicity, healthy play, and inclusion, because especially the current generation, like the Gen Zs, are more leaning towards social play. And obviously when you are playing social, or when you are of the LGBTQ plus community, for example, and you are playing a game, you don't want to see any racial slurs or anything hurtful in the comments. You go there because you want to play, and you don't want to not play a game because the community is hurtful. So there's a lot of things that we are doing in order to help combat that. And I think as an industry, we are there's still a lot we can do, and in order to get that. But essentially, with the products we are building, we want to really normalize that we are not talking about, oh look, there's a woman in the game, or in a whatever, in FIFA, and it's not becoming something to specifically talk about, but it's something we are celebrating, and it just becomes normalized that these communities and what we currently call marginalized communities just become, that's how we play. They are, we have more people of those minorities as playable characters, and not just as background characters, for example. And as an anecdote, how that really struck me as something that I feel that is really important to our players, is when I think it was back in 2013, we were in PAX Prime in Seattle, where we were revealing the Dragon Age Inquisition launch trailer. And we had a panel with a few of us interacting with our community, and there were people from the Dragon Age community lining up, telling and sharing their stories, how the Dragon Age games have helped them come out of the closet, like Julien was saying, and really coming to terms with differences they had with their parents, where someone was sharing that they come from a very Jewish family environment, and their family didn't accept that that person was atheist. But Dragon Age, for example, helped them get through those difficulties in their life. And that's when I realized that, we're not just making toys, or sometimes people would say, we are not brain surgeons, we're just making games. And it's kind of, we're not just making games, we are making games that really can make a difference in people's lives, and can help people work through traumatic experiences. I mean, look at something like Animal Crossing, which has helped people deal with grief, and there's plenty of other examples. So I think we just need to be very conscious that the games we are making, we are shaping culture. We need to be more conscious of the impact our games can make in a social and socio-cultural environment.
Thanks, Tülay. And I think your comment is very on point. You mentioned how we have a diverse community of players, and I think often when games are being built, there's an assumption that there's a default audience that we're aiming at. And I guess when we want to make our games truly authentic and that truly represent, sometimes there's a balancing between the two. So I guess my question to the team is, how do you balance catering to the majority of your audience, all the while balancing the need for diversity and inclusion?
I can start with that. So one of the things we do to help guide teams through this process is what we call the inclusion framework or the inclusive design framework, which encompasses guidelines, research and data that we have, but also a set of guiding questions, such as guiding questions that developers can use to make those assessments that you were mentioning. Is like, how often do we seek to tell stories of underrepresented people? Are we portraying people with those diverse backgrounds authentically? Are we imparting any unconscious bias into our games? And how diverse and inclusive are our modes, our story, our game teams, and also our teams who are going to build those experiences? And I think in the absence of what we also mentioned, the talent question is, we are supplementing that talent gap with utilizing, for example, our employee resource groups and to give feedback on the game with people from different backgrounds and minority groups. And I think maybe Joanna has a really great example of how we have used these principles in practice.
Yeah, building off of what Tülay mentioned with the inclusion framework, for The Sims 4, during Hispanic Heritage Month, the Somos EA group for Hispanic and Latinx employees partnered with The Sims to come up with a lot of really great content to celebrate the Hispanic community. And we wanted to make sure that it was free and available to anyone who was interested. And the team did a great job collaborating with Somos EA to make sure that the community was not represented as a monolithic group, because we're not, right? There are over 20 countries that are represented within Latin America. We don't look the same, we don't act the same, we have different customs. And one of the ways that we really nailed it, I think, is in the food. As most people know, The Sims is all about inclusivity and allowing people to tell their stories. So we have a lot of great content already, but there was some food items that weren't represented. We had things already like empanadas and tacos, but now you can go into The Sims 4 and you will see pollo a la brasa, which is from Peru, or chimis from Dominican Republic, or elotes from Mexico. And the way that that worked out is we created a spreadsheet and invited the members of the Somos ERG to contribute to it. We wanted to make sure that everyone was authentically represented, and it wasn't just some people in a room who were disconnected from the culture who were making these decisions. It was people who lived the culture and were contributing, because we wanted to make sure that we were well represented in the game. So I just, I'm not even on the Sims team, but having had a role on that team and with that initiative is really one of the most gratifying things I've done at EA.
Yeah. I think, Julien, just to intersect, you had a great example with how the games we are making that are diverse and inclusive can actually attract the talent that we want as well.
Yeah. So it was interesting that you were mentioning Dragon Age, because I think Dragon Age Inquisition was the first time where I could play someone who was kind of like me, like a gay man with a sassy boyfriend, I was gonna say. And I kept just like, Dorian in this game is like so much fun, and I kept just going there, and I was just like, like, this is awesome. And I think there was also like traits in his story that were like very subtle and also very, very well written, so it felt like it was authentic. And yeah, to your point, like having played this game, knowing about the reputation of BioWare for these stories, and then going into the interview, and on day one, you get the little presentation about EA, the story of the company, and then you get some you get to know about the ERGs and all these things that you can do. Like, you know, it felt like really true. It felt genuine, and you know, I felt safe from day one, which was like such a big change from when I started games. You know, it was like, you know, like I never expected that it would like change this much this fast in a way, even though it was 10 years. But like, yeah, it was definitely a great experience.
Yeah, I know there's also the example of Battlefield 5 where the Aspire ERG was also consulted in order to portray a more authentic version of what Asians are rather than the typical or stereotypical version of who an Asian is. And when I say Asian, even that, I think there's, for me, it's an unconscious bias because, you know, I often forget that Asian is an entire continent. It's huge. And often we stereotype Asian as someone who, I guess, like me, yellow, quote unquote, skinned individual. And we forget that our Asian brothers and sisters include people who are in India, in the Indian subcontinent. It even goes as far technically as people who are in the Middle East.
In the Battlefield, though, we also wanted to just make sure that we deal with the subject matter of the Pacific, the war in the Pacific, in a respectful manner, because we knew how sensitive it can be
right.
from a cultural point of view. So I think that was really it was really a great experience to work with that ERG as well, to kind of just give a different perspective of what could be offensive or disrespectful from a cultural point of view. So that was very appreciated.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think what's important to know that is that the inclusion within our games is of a token representation of who a stereotype should be, or a minority should be. It really is to try to make sure that we adequately and authentically represent them. And, you know, listening to Joann speak, I was actually hungry just thinking of all the food that was in the Sims game. And I think that really is what we have to do as allies in terms of how we create games. We need to make them more authentic in order to make them more inclusive. More inclusive games makes it that we have a wider audience and wider viewership. And that in turn also, funny enough, is a recruiting tool, which makes it that people like Julien, myself, and Alma, and Joann, and Tülay are more inclined to join a company that is more diverse and inclusive, which then in turn also results in even better products and services. I think we would all want to talk a bit more about this, and we would love to have more time. But unfortunately, time is not on our side at this present moment. So I'm going to wrap things up by thanking everyone for participating in today's panel. I also want to speak to our participants. Inclusion and diversity is a journey. It's not just questions. It's not just a question of checking a box like Tülay was mentioning. It's having courageous conversations with people. It's taking positive actions. It's lending your voice to those who may not have one. So as we continue down this road of diversity and inclusion, I would like to invite everyone who is participating on this panel discussion, and as well our panelists to continue to do so. I'd like to invite you to actively listen, like my colleague Alma just said earlier. I'd like you to be aware of any biases that you have and take action by being part of the solution, by supporting and lending a voice to those who are underrepresented. So with that, I'd like to thank again everyone on this panel. I'd like to thank all our participants, and I'd like to also open up this panel to discussion and questions by our participants. Je voulais aussi attirer votre attention au fait que si vous voulez poser vos questions en français, vous êtes libre à le faire. Et j'ouvre la parole, j'ouvre le panel à tout le monde dans ce moment-ci. Questions, comments, anyone? Well, I guess we did an amazing job. So I guess I wanted to ask you, Tülay, in terms of Battlefield 5, I'm curious as to how it was received for the portrayal of Asians in the game itself, because I saw it from our side, in terms of speaking to people within the community. Do you have any idea, I guess, on the player side, how that was received?
I think on the player side, I want to say the way we can assess that it was a success is that the attention was on the product. The attention was on it is a great expansion of battlefield in the theater of war in the Pacific has been well received, but to the point of the normalizing the subject of Asians have been authentically represented wasn't something that stuck out, but it's kind of the game is great, which is essentially what we want. We don't want to distract the attention from the overall quality of the product. Is great, it's immersive, and it's fun to play.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, it was a success, I would say.
I guess we also didn't want to push under the carpet historical facts also, so it was an accurate portrayal, but at the same time it was a respectful portrayal of I guess events.
Yeah.
Quick question, actually. I know that Julien mentioned that for him, the fact that EA had Pride ERG was one of the reasons he said, "Hey, this is a company I could feel myself being part of." What are your thoughts on ERGs?
I can speak to this a little bit because I've only been at EA for 2 years, so something that's been really exciting to me as someone in like a more junior role, or at least when I started, I was in a pretty junior role, was the opportunity to like collaborate with people outside of my usual like project group or my direct team, and it's also a way for people in underrepresented groups, but also anyone to like practice practice leadership skills or acquire skills that they wouldn't otherwise get in the immediate like parameters of their role. So there's a lot of value, I think, as far as investing in your employees as well, for people who are motivated um, to work on these projects and to also like advance their skills at the same time. I think it's just like a great tool to share perspectives, but also to grow your skill set and your background. And that's something that we don't talk about a ton, but it's just really useful in that sense as well.
I can add to that, Danny. One of the things that I would say is that the ERGs have been a lifeline for me being in this working from home situation and that lack of social connection. I've been able to satisfy that through my involvement with the ERGs. We've done virtual parties through Beat. We have a spades competition that's happening. And because everything is happening virtually, we've also been able to open it up and connect with other folks. I mean, I'm sitting in Orlando right now having this conversation with all of you. And I've been able to share and meet other folks, and the ERGs have really contributed, I think, to building culture at EA while we've been in a difficult situation.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think there's a common misconception that ERGs are clubs, and we're not clubs. We are really resource groups, as the name entails. We're here to provide resources in part to the company, but also to members of those communities, but also to our allies in order for them to better understand who we are, what we do, and why those certain issues are important to us.
And I think it's also a key part of an inclusion strategy in a company. You cannot just do bottom up and you cannot just do top down. You need both approaches. You need the company to say, we believe inclusion is important, and then do actions. And then you also need to involve the people who are from these groups and actually ask them, like, what do you need? And then give them the needs. So the ERGs, we have budget. We can actually conduct actions. So it's not just empty word. It's like really involving the people who are in those groups.
Yeah. Well, time is running out, so I guess I will once again thanks everyone. I'd like to thank Migs and Mega as well for helping us organize this panel. I think we had a great discussion, and I also invite anyone who, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I believe you have all our contact information. If not, feel free to send us private messages, and we'll try our best to help you and or provide you with any resources that we may have. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.